Is it the best of times or is it the worst of times?
Is it the age of wisdom or is it the age of foolishness? I'm Brian Costello.
And I'm Gregg Richards, and we are the Unselects. Brian, on today's episode, we're going to focus on the warehouse project in August. They have come to a decision, the planning board did. And really, I want to look at this from 3 steps. Really want to, let everybody know what happened. We'll talk about why it happened and what the structure of Shrewsbury is on the planning side that allowed it to happen. And then at the end, I'm actually pleased that we'll be able to kind of walk through with residents how we could do things differently and how they can help do things differently if they feel this decision wasn't maybe in the best interest of Shrewsbury. So what we want to do is immediately go to a clip, and we're going to actually see first a clip of how the planning board handled closing of the public hearing. So let's take a look at that.
All those in favor of continuing signify by saying aye.
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 Is that 2?
Yeah.
3? Well,
Aye. No, aye.
you're 3.
Yes.
Okay. And those opposed, no?
No.
Okay, so 3-2. We're continuing the hearing until August.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I'd like to make a motion to close this public hearing.
Okay. So all of those in favor of closing the public hearing signify by saying aye.
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 Hey, Brian, my main question. Why do you keep a public hearing open and then immediately the next month, after you've told residents that they will have another opportunity to speak, and a lot of the impacted abutters wanted to come and share more opinions, do you immediately close a hearing? Does that seem like something that is taking residents' opinions into account?
No, it's the voice of the people, and the voice of the people, they would argue, has been heard, but I would argue in that instance, it absolutely hasn't been heard because that voice still wanted to speak.
Right. So why would you, if that was the ultimate decision, why are you stringing along the residents? If you're in that board and you say, hey, I don't believe that we should continue with public hearing, then close the public hearing and say, no, we believe that this is the right time. We've heard everything we need. I think it's disingenuous to kind of string this along for another month and then immediately, shut the hearing down, which, caused a lot of, issue with those in attendance. So immediately following that, I also want to go to comments that the planning board made regarding not allowing the public to speak. So let's take a quick watch of that.
The board is not required to continue to have public input after the board thinks that it has enough information for it to make a decision. We wish we had the power that everybody thinks we have, but we don't. So I think we're making our best effort to do what we can to address the issues that were raised within the confines of the law.
What is your thoughts on his comment there?
I think he's wrong.
No.
They do have the power. They chose not to have the power. They chose to kind of go the easy route maybe, or decide they were tired of hearing a lot of people really concerned about this project. And I think they got beaten down, perhaps by their inability to understand what the consequences would be.
Yeah, and one of the comments I want to touch upon here, because we're going to dig into this in a lot of detail today, is he mentions, I wish we had the power people think we did. And you're going to see, I'm going to try to lay it out, that he purposefully is not giving himself and the board that power. And we're going to show how we're purposely doing that so we don't have to make those types of decisions at the planning board level.
Yeah.
Okay. So we are going to move on here. So after they closed the public hearing, explained why, now we're going to take a look at the actual vote on the project, which would have been two actual permits. One was a site plan approval, and the other one was a special permit for the aquifer. So let's take a listen.
Are we good?
Mr. Chairman, now you have 90 days to make a decision and
Right.
file that decision in the town clerk's office.
Right,
And from the date you make the decision, you have 14 days to file it.
right.
So, but you have to file it within that 90-day period.
Okay.
So you can deliberate this evening, or you can deliberate at your next meeting, but you can't deliberate outside of a public meeting.
So, you made a motion
Yes.
to approve the site plan dated August 1st.
Yes.
Okay, we had a second, right? Okay. I'm glad they straightened me out, so now I know it's for site plan approval. So all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, so voted. Special permit.
I will make a motion to consider the special permit for 142 Clinton Street,
Dated,
dated August 1st, 2024. My apologies.
we have a second? You can do that one.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? There being none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. Okay. So, 5-0. So, for the moment, we are done, correct?
Correct.
Okay, Brian, I want to go back. The one interesting point of this meeting I found was our town council was actually present. A lot of times, actually, I can't remember the last time he was actually present at a meeting, so he was there, I think, providing guidance to the board. But one thing he mentioned I want to ask you about, he said that you can deliberate now or at a future meeting, but you must deliberate in public.
Yeah, and you have 90 days,
Right.
right? So they decided we don't want to talk about this in public, and therefore somehow came to the decision without speaking to each other in public, because when we're at these meetings, we've never had them actually talk to each other very much at these meetings.
Right.
So it's interesting, right? They just immediately voted.
So, in my mind, the definition of deliberation was kind of like an open dialogue, a discussion.
Yep.
So, if that has to occur in public, I would argue that there is no doubt in my mind that they were discussing this, discussed how they were going to vote, because Mr. McGoldrick, the planner, had brought the actual decision to draft with him. And they went through it in probably less than 5 minutes and came to that conclusion. There's no way they weren't talking outside of an open meeting. No way. I can't prove it, right? But I think that's the point we want to make, is that these, and when people say these decisions are backroom deals, what they mean is that by open meeting law, you're supposed to deliberate and discuss these in public, and 99% of the time they don't, right? So this is not a unique case, I think. Would you agree that
It's
that
not
happens?
unique. It's the standard bureaucratic way of doing business in mid and small town America.
Yeah, absolutely. So we kind of want to, now that they've made the decision, right, there's not a lot we can do in this particular case. So I want to kind of just walk back a little bit and say, how did we get to this point? So how did we get to a point where the board is claiming we don't have the power we thought we did? This is a project that a lot of the abutters didn't want to see go in. So how did we get there? And I want to just show that we did everything in our power as a town to put this project there and support the developer versus kind of listening to the residents. And I think that's what we kind of want to look at here. So the next thing, I'm going to go back really quick here, 2020, because this is when we changed zoning at town meeting because the developer asked us to do it. So let's watch that quick.
160 Holden Street, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of GFI Partners, acquired this property in late January and has moved forward to try to consolidate the Worcester Sand and Gravel, now known as Worcester Sand and Stone operation. COVID has certainly impacted our review of the site. We met very early with the town, and this is really the first step in coming up with a full-blown master plan for the site, for the consolidation of the Worcester Sand and Stone operation, and determining the best means of use.
So that was when they changed the zoning from commercial to industrial to support a warehouse type project. And we'll show a little bit later on how that's defined in zoning bylaws. But the next piece that happened for this project was in 2022. And actually, we're going to go here to the pre-town meeting as they talk about the articles for the additional article that GFI had asked the town to put through the town meeting.
Let's move on to Article 35. Article 35 came before the Board of Selectmen after consultation with staff, Planning and Economic Development Department, Town Manager's Office, when developers inquired on increasing the permitted height for buildings in the limited industrial zoning district, as well as loading and unloading in the front of the building in the limited industrial zoning district. Bernie, could you take us through what the requirements are today in the limited industrial related to that, and what is being proposed as part of this article as a change?
So this was brought to us and is being petitioned by a landowner in town.
The reason I wanted to highlight that and framed it that way is because her comments at the beginning, I just compare and contrast. When she actually says it was like, oh yeah, we had a lot of deliberation. We were talking amongst departments. And then it was, landowner said a developer wanted to change it because it's benefiting them.
Yeah. And, the other piece is the landowner is not in town. The landowner is an out-of-town developer,
Good point.
and so it wasn't brought to us by some small landowner,
Right. And it wasn't like you and I, because, if you or I would go and try to say, hey, I really want to modify something either on my property or something, I want to have an article at town meeting. I don't believe we would get the same level of support that a large developer would.
Yeah, and I think it's also a lot of legalese or professional language that the average citizen may not be aware of. What's the difference between light industrial and commercial and industrial, right? I think that they don't have a desire to actually explain that.
No, absolutely not. So this last clip from town meeting is the attorney from GFI at town meeting. And I'd like you to pay close attention to what he says at the end of his statement here.
My name is Mark Donahue. I represent GFI Partners. GFI Partners owns 4 separate tracts of limited industrial zoning property in the town of Shrewsbury. So what this is a greater demand for that ability, particularly in the logistics field, to be able to maximize the utilization of the buildings by being able to go up and use multiple levels. This provides the opportunity to do it, but only to do it if it's in the right place and appropriate for the surrounding properties.
So is it at the right place and appropriate for the surrounding properties?
Well, according to the neighbors, no, but they seem to have been shut down at the planning board time and time again.
Right. And I think there's actually a nuance in this, and I might be wrong. And when I'm not 100% sure, I will tell people not 100% sure. I believe the nuance is they didn't have to go above 50 feet. I believe they kept it below 50 feet, so they didn't have to get a special permit for it. But the point is they went through the whole process, and when town meeting is listening to the developer and making a decision, they hear a statement like that and say, oh, well, it's only if it's the right fit for the right area in town, and there's going to be feedback. And it's disingenuous. It's not true.
No, it's completely not true. And it's a situation where, again, a sophisticated developer comes in, says some fancy things, and sort of waves the hand, and those in town bureaucracy just sort of nod. Exactly. Yes, we will do this. It's like a Jedi mind trick over the planning board.
Oh, that's funny. So what I want to go to now is to say that how did we get here? And I think one of the things that's important is you always have to look at the leadership in town and what their beliefs or what their philosophy is. What's their direction? What's the strategy? So I want to go here to our town manager, Kevin Mizikar, from that same 2022 town meeting and listen to how he's articulating commercial development in town.
This is an economic development initiative for the town. We all know, and a lot of people point out, that Shrewsbury's percentage of commercial industrial property does not rival our neighbor communities. Many communities have greater percentages of commercial industrial assets within their community than we do in Shrewsbury. And we all know that the more businesses that are contributing to taxes, that provides some offset to residential properties. So as we consider economic development initiatives and try to remain attractive, we see the need to bring this this forward for town meeting's consideration. All I'm simply putting out there is, as we try to be attractive in 2022 and beyond to businesses, there are some initiatives that we need to undertake from a zoning standpoint to continue our economic competitiveness and continue to push that commercial industrial property value within the community upwards. So that's what this initiative is about. It's about putting in play more modern opportunities for people to invest in us. Thank you.
Yeah, I guess my message to Kevin Mizikar is nobody has ever once said, you know what, I want to move to that town because there's a lot of industrial buildings going up, right? People move to towns for quality of life. They move to towns to have a quality of life for their family, and they don't want actually overbuilding in their towns. Nobody wants that. And I think this is the problem in this town is they believe economic stimulus is solely building industrial and commercial, when I think the average person just wants to live in a nice town.
Well, and the other piece is I feel like they gaslight the residents in a way because they say some offset. It's almost like they hold this thing over your head. It's like, well, you don't want us to have to increase your taxes a lot, do you? Do you? You have to do this, or, oh, you're going to be paying more. And that's the part I think that also bothers me about it, because we're going to see here in the next few clips that other members of the say leadership of the town have similar statements. So that's the part that I struggle with, because I've never seen once that says, if you do A, guess what, your tax bill will go down by X, because it just doesn't happen, right?
Yep. It's never happened in the history of any taxes. Our taxes will never go down, no matter how many commercial properties they build.
Exactly. So now we're going to go and we're going to look at the time chairman of the select board, Mo DiPaolo, okay, and his comment around commercial development and its impact on taxes. Let's take a listen.
So if we're going to be competitive, we need to do our zoning so that we can attract the Class A businesses. And we need to maximize the value of those properties to help our taxes.
Who are we competing against is my question. In other words, I thought we were competing to be a great town to live in. Right. If we are, then we're failing miserably. And Mr. DiPaolo is actually helping with that failure, not growing the opportunity.
Yeah, apparently there's like standings someplace, right? Right, where we're like, are we in third? Are we in second? Like, what are the goals of us to get the first, right? And I haven't really actually seen, so anybody lay out like, here's the goals of the town, right? And right now we're in fourth place, right? And we're trying to get up to first. It's not like we're trying to gain market share, like like we are actually an industry or something of ourselves, which, I kind of struggle with. I think it's just like, to your point, what is with all this competition against neighboring towns for giant buildings that are going to essentially,
destroy quality
of life and what our town actually looks like. It's silly to me. So one more clip here, same town meeting that we're going to talk about from Chairman DiPaolo. Let's listen to this next one, what he has to say here.
Worcester Sand and Gravel is the primary focus of this. It isn't the only limited industrial space in town, but it's the biggest that's left. We have some other places along Route 20, but Worcester Sand is the place where this is going to benefit us the most. There is a parcel where UPS may go down by the train station in Grafton. But those are the big areas where this kind of a development would go.
So I want to talk a little bit about a timeline here, because looking back on this, I feel like Nostradamus, a little bit on this one, because let's just be clear. Mo DiPaolo was the select board chairman in 2022. He announced he was not going to run again in November of 22 for his seat that came up in May of 23, I believe. In June of 23, he's at the planning board meeting, the first time he's elected chairman, okay, where he just stated, right, that we need to develop zoning laws to favor commercial property, and that there's two commercial properties in his mind that are the right things, Worcester Sand and Gravel and the UPS project. And he's the chairman of the planning board, as we saw at the beginning, that's making those decisions. That's a little suspicious to me that there is, no connection there at all about his belief system and the decisions that they ultimately made.
Yeah, I think the key is his belief system is growth is good. Economic growth, in his mind, economic growth is large buildings with many trucks, right?
Yeah.
And in his mind, I think it's just tax revenue. We've heard this 100 times. Tax, 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 right? But we don't really see any incrementality there, and we certainly don't see our taxes go down. So he is a pro-build giant ugly buildings guy, and I think your average person is not that.
Right.
And I think maybe we should look at a planning board that, a planning board should be looking out for the people. And they should be looking out, I'll be a broken record, they should be looking out for quality of life
Right.
over, things that impact in a major way a lot of residents.
And isn't it an oversight board similar to select board? Select board is overseeing a full-time resource to town manager. The planning board is overseeing the planner, right? Yeah. So let's look a little bit at the structure here. We're going to go to a slide just to remind everybody that our town is set up with an appointed planning board. The town manager has the ability through our bylaws, general bylaw, to appoint a planning board. Okay, that's how we're set up. Our planning board, we're going to go to it now. Here are the members of the planning board. All right, Stephen Rodolakis, Julia Holstrom, Perna Rao, Constantine Alati, and Maurice DiPaolo. Okay, now I'm going to walk through on each one of these individuals what their work, what they do for work, and how that might impact their decision making when it comes to the planning board. So first, Mr. Rodolakis is a lawyer at the firm Fletcher Tilton. All right, Fletcher Tilton is also employs Mark Donahue, who you saw in the clips. He's the attorney for not only GFI, he's also representing UPS in front of our planning board. He represents a lot of people in front of our planning board. Mr. Rodolakis is also, married to Karen Polito, the former lieutenant governor, but also Polito Development. So development and attorneys that represent developers. Yeah. Julie works for Worcester Business Development Corporation, which has development in the name, right? And the other reason there's a dashed line there is that Mr. Rodolakis is also the vice chairman of the Worcester Business Development Corporation, right? Funny how that would work. Perna works for a company, RCAP Solutions, who, at the bottom, is Housing Development Needs. Develops housing, developer, right? Company that is invested in developing. Constantine and Mo, were essentially, let's say, involved with, city government. So Constantine for like 35 years, Worcester Public Works, and then Mo on the select board for a long time. And I think he was somehow connected to SPAG. Somebody would have to correct me. I don't know his whole life story.
Yes, he worked for SPAGs.
But very, very involved or very knowledgeable of, let's say, government processes and how cities and towns, tax dollars and everything work. So real quick on Worcester Business Development Corporation, one of the key things is they help people get permits so that they can build things, right? So I kind of look at this and I said, I think I mentioned it to you, was, if my lens in life and what I do for work is all around developing, I almost have this unconscious bias towards development where I'm always going to lean to, if I have two decisions to make, build or no build, I'm going to build. What do you think?
Yeah, 100%, right? I think the argument back would be, well, no, they understand the ins and outs, but your life is specifically around building stuff, right? Commercial development, too, heavily commercial development. WBDC is an absolutely large kind of quasi-governmental sort of building development company, right? So this is what they do. This is how you think. So it's in your mind we want development.
Right, and the reason why they were appointed is because we look back at our town manager, Kevin Mizikar, his philosophy, right, which is a valid philosophy to have, when we can disagree that I don't think it's the right philosophy, but it's a valid philosophy. He is going to pick people aligned to that philosophy, right? Yeah. Because if you want to say, I think it's in the best interest where we get things done, you need people aligned with that to ensure they get done, right, and that they pass through these. So I want to touch upon quick, and we're going to transition here to how we could possibly do things differently, is remind everybody back to the checklist we've talked about with town meeting. And two key pieces here. Are the decisions we're making in the best interest of all, and are we thinking about the minority? And the minority in this case, right, I think about it as if you're the unlucky one that happens to be next to a building where there could be, 30,000 other residents not impacted, but 100 to 200 people may be impacted. Fair?
Yeah, absolutely. The minority in this case are those impacted by the development.
Absolutely. So Holliston, I learned this, right? It was very interesting. Holliston had a very, very similar project to what happened on Clinton Street and Holton Street in Hopkingbrook Park, right? They had a 550,000 square foot warehouse, which you can see there as the plans, and it was on the border of Medway, and they denied it. All right, this got denied. And we're going to walk through how and why, and in my opinion, how Shrewsbury should probably try to change to probably give the residents a little bit more say in what gets done in town. So let's look at this. This is a copy of their decision. So when the planning board makes a decision, they have to file it with the clerk legally and whatnot. I want to just read this because I think it's super important. It says the proposed project, even if it could be limited to the level of activity proposed by the applicant, will have a negative impact on the town's character, the word character. Furthermore, should the town be unable to effectively enforce and monitor the noise, traffic, and other impacts, the impacts to the town's character will be exacerbated.
Yeah, quality of life.
What were the things, if you remember back in the project, all those individual monthly meetings that we had at the planning board, what were they talking about there?
The residents specifically?
Well, and even the engineers they had, and they had noise studies,
Yeah.
traffic studies.
Yeah.
All of those pieces there that are saying, and even I remember them talking about, well, we're going to monitor it. We're going to do a report. Well, who? And this is why I love this statement to
It's
say,
common sense, right?
Yeah.
It's just common sense. We're a small town.
right,
Yeah, we just don't trust developers to actually say what they're going to say. We don't have the time to monitor it.
Right.
And oh, by the way, we think the town would be impacted because we like the small town environment.
absolutely. So let's listen to this planning board. And the key difference between Holliston's planning board and ours is this planning board is elected.
Yep.
These are elected by their fellow citizens, their fellow residents. Let's listen to what they actually said.
My thoughts on A, the degree to which proposed use complies with dimensional requirements but its appropriate location does not significantly alter the character of the neighborhood. That one would be tough for me to endorse. Right, and then the last sentence there, and is designed to be compatible with the character and the scale of the neighboring properties. So I think it fails that test as well.
And in that paragraph, he has talked about the amount of, if you go on to page 9, he's talked about the amount of traffic, specifically heavy trucks, noise, lighting, diesel exhaust.
This is the exact conversation we had at the planning board.
It is.
Except the planning board that was appointed ignored everybody in the room.
Yeah, everybody in the room is bringing those up.
Yeah.
It is. That's why when I watch, I go, oh my! It's such a complete. It's like we're in the upside down world, right? Yeah. The difference is between the two. And let's look at how they got there, though, because there's other things they did. It wasn't just having the elected board, okay? What they actually ended up doing is they used their town meeting to benefit the residents. So they looked at their zoning bylaws. And the zoning bylaws, they changed a couple things. They changed a warehouse definition. Actually, back in 2016, they limited the size of a warehouse that was to 200,000 square feet. And they also defined operating hours, right? So it wouldn't be like a 24/7 piece. The real key part I want you to look at is we have this as well. There's a chart in our zoning bylaws that shows you uses and what zoning areas can they be used. So you'll have, if you look there, there's a lot of these are like rural 1, rural 2, commercial 1, blah, blah, blah. They different vernacular in different towns, industrial. So what they ended up doing was changing as many things as they could to special permit. And they're going to talk a little bit, and we'll get into why special permit is such a powerful piece to have in your zoning bylaws. But they proactively did this to prevent these types of projects. So many people might ask, well, how do you change a zoning bylaw? Well, I'm going to let our previous planner tell you, because he also mentions this in 2022. So let's listen to what he has to say.
The process for changing zoning is exactly what we're doing here this evening. So it comes to the selectmen defer it to the planning board, which starts its public hearing process, goes through that public hearing process. I present to the Finance Committee, I present to the Board of Selectmen. As you heard this evening, they had recommendation votes, and then it comes to all of you here at town meeting for a 2/3 vote to change the zoning district. So the process would be the same. If you want to expand it, you want to shrink it, you want to add something to it, take something away, that's the process for doing it.
Puts the power into the people, which we have the power to do here in
Absolutely.
Shrewsbury. We've just not had the select board, the planning board, the finance committee ever endorse anything like this.
Exactly. A lot of times they'll just put things up and they'll never have an explanation behind why it's going to be done. They put it out there and just say, well, this is it. And then, then they also use terms like, well, we usually never have any issues. Zoning bylaws always pass. We never have issues with zoning. So I think it's very important. So let's take a look at the special permit. And there's a language, and this is Holliston's again, but I love this A. And you actually heard one of the planning board members mention A. This is what he was referring to, where it does specifically say, does not significantly alter the character of a neighborhood, or it's incompatible with the existing uses, or the scale of the neighboring. I mean, it's allowing them with these to say, yeah, I understand you can want to build what you want to build, but within reason. That like you said, it's common sense, right?
Common sense, 500, 600, 1,000 trucks, giant bright lights all night long. That changes the character of a neighborhood.
Right. And speaking of common sense, we're going to go to a dialogue. This was like their pre-town meeting. They were discussing this change that they wanted to make in the town meeting. And the person who's talking is actually their town council, right? We showed our town council at the beginning, providing advice 14 days, 90 days, just to the planning board. But listen to how their town council is assisting them in writing a bylaw in the favor of how they believe the residents will best be served. Let's take a listen.
The job number one was to make sure that it was a special permit. So you could capture all of that authority and make site-specific decisions. Job number two was to kind of put a bright line test so that you wouldn't even have to entertain the question as to whether or not excessively large or overnight or late night activities would happen.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's very clear there. You want to make a special permit so that you can make site-specific decisions. That is the most common sense thing I've ever heard, right? And I think what you would hear from a pro-developer standpoint, they would say, well, we're competing, and the developers don't want to go through the long, arduous task of trying to convince a planning board that this is the right fit. They want to have as of right so that they only have to get site plan approval and they can build whatever they want. Like, I don't agree with that. I don't understand what do you think the argument would be for not making things a special permit?
There probably isn't one that makes sense unless you're pro-developer, right? This town council is actually giving the town council that actually matters to the people.
That's where that
Right.
word comes from?
Yeah,
Council?
yeah. And it's funny because listening to him, you're thinking, that's what we need in Shrewsbury, which is how do I think about what people need?
Absolutely. The one point I want to actually touch upon, because it was so passionate, one of the residents, Andy Barnes, he spoke out. He's an abutter to the project. I'm going to go back to one thing he said in the planning board, and then I want to compare and contrast his statement and his passion and desperation in his voice compared with how they handled the same topic in Holliston. So let's take a listen.
What was also brought up in the last meeting was, oh, everybody's getting all worried about sound, and 42 dBA is actually just a normal conversation. We're talking about a normal conversation measured at the second story level of a home, which is your bedroom. That's why we're required to measure there, right? So yeah, a normal conversation isn't as loud as a diesel truck. I totally agree. Is there anybody here that wants a normal level conversation happening in their bedroom in the middle of the night while they're trying to sleep?
Right. So common sense.
Yeah.
Right.
Stop making sense, Andy.
I know. Stop making sense. So Holliston actually has a dialogue around this, which we're going to go to now, around that start time. And where did that start time come from? Why do we have this, hey, operating hours until X, Y, and Z? So let's listen to how common sense they are in Holliston.
In the definition, why did we go with 9 o'clock?
Seemed to be a somewhat of a recognition that they probably go longer than a 9 to 5, but given the discourse that we've had on warehouses, wouldn't want to go past a time that could interfere with people's sleep and other nighttime activities.
So sleep and nighttime activity, I mean, it's common sense. It's respect, right? It's respecting the neighbors, respecting who's there, right? And it's just refreshing, honestly, to listen to this, because, I mean, sitting through some of those planning board meetings and just, I feel people felt so helpless. The residents felt so helpless that there's nobody there to help them. Like, this is dramatically changing not only their way of life, their property, and nobody's listening. And then you compare it with this, and it's completely opposite.
Complete opposite. It's almost a travesty the way you think about it. We went to these planning board meetings. I couldn't attend every last one of them, and I know most of those people did. And I would say there was disdain from these appointed bureaucrats.
Right. So everything isn't, I say, glum, because what can we do about it? And we're going to talk about what we can do about it. Here is what the Unselects propose that we do about it in Shrewsbury. Number one, create a citizen's petition at town meeting this November to make the planning board elected instead of appointed. There was an actual survey in 2018 by planners, and it turns out 70% of planning boards are elected versus 30 being appointed. So we are actually in the minority. And I think you had a comment about why that makes sense to you. So why does that make sense to you that they would have more boards that are elected versus appointed?
The voice of the people matters the most. People are held accountable if there's accountability from the voters, right? And right now where we're at is the planning board that's appointed are all development-focused people.
Yep.
If we want to change that, the only way we can change that is to get real townspeople that have a different point of view make those decisions.
Absolutely. And then the last point, ensure all of the zoning bylaw changes are done with full transparency and to the benefit of residents, meaning if the planning board or the planner brings up an article and says we're going to make a zoning change, he should be able to articulate why are they bringing it up, what benefit to the residents does it serve, and what potentially could be some of the long-term impacts of it, period. No as of right, no more as of right zoning that says you can do whatever you want no matter what. We need to take better control of it and allow us to make common sense decisions, right, on what gets put into town.
Absolutely. And it does come down to common sense, right? It really is, how can a resident be more involved? And we'll tell you this all the time. You should get more involved. You should run for office. Okay, let's put this on the ballot.
Right.
Let's see who's going to run for office for planning board, and let's get those folks that are pro quality of life in there for a change.
Right. So that's all we have time for in this episode. I do hope those of you out there who want to be part or think that citizens petition is a good idea to flip our board to an elected board will support the effort. Town meeting members who are listening, if you see it out there, love to get some feedback on, do you think that would be a good idea? Make sure you can always follow us. We do have a Facebook page. Take a look at us at the Shrewsbury Media Connection YouTube page, and we'll see you on the next episodes of the Unselects. And I'm Gregg Richards.
I'm Brian Costello, and we are the Unselects.